Okay, so our opponents originally said that embryos also die in the natural process, but you have to kind of consider the fact over the past couple years how many embryos actually do die and are destroyed from the research process as opposed to the natural process. It definitely outweighs it by a lot. Our opponents also stated that reproductive cloning could be used to, in a sense, kind of replace a child that passed away prematurely, kind of helping out the parents like from that hardship and whatnot. But one of the arguments that we kind of have in response is that, take it for example, if you clone someone like Michael Jordan, the person, just an example, the person might not necessarily want to be a basketball player when they grow up. They might want to be an accountant. They might not know how to play basketball in the future because, like they also said, it does rely on a certain environment. So if you do want to clone your son or daughter, you won't necessarily get the same outcome by replacing that particular human being. Scientists also cannot predict potential development of viruses and other agents of destruction to which a cloned species might need to react to in the future. So say you do want to replace said child, you kind of have to outweigh the pros and cons and consider all the risks of potentially harming that future second baby as opposed to your first baby. Socially, being a clone would be very hard to a child. If these human clones were brought to term, they'll never be like any other human being with a proper lineage. They wouldn't be anyone's technically child, they wouldn't be anyone's technically grandchild or sibling or brother. It would just kind of be this weird limbo of just being a clone and being kind of very extremely out of the norm. Human cloning violates the rights of the child to the parents. So in the case of reproductive cloning, the child would be brought to term and delivered without the benefit of parents, since it would carry the genetic code of only one who had supplied the DNA from his or her somatic self. This would also constitute a violation of the rights of the child in many ways, since there is currently no basis in uncommon or statutory law to determine who would have responsibility for the care of the child who would be left in a weird precarious position. And then our opponents also touched on the topic of cost and public and private funding. In regards to cost, it would be very hard to know if health insurance company or even private funding would pay for a person to have an organ doned, or if these prices would be so prohibitive to make the process unaffordable or only available to few. Cow eggs, for instance, can be bought cheaply from slaughterhouses that would otherwise discard them. For a recent paper on cloning in Science, host Monobert's Peter Momberts, a scientist at Rockefeller University in New York City who clones mice, ran through 4,000 mice oocytes. He estimates that might be $2,000 worth of mice. Doing the same work in humans would essentially cost $2 million. So as I touched upon earlier, states have had to kind of take it upon themselves in order to stop reproductive cloning due to the lack of action of the federal government. So Senator Maggie Tinsman was very concerned with this topic in general, and she is the senator of Iowa, and Iowa actually banned all forms of human cloning in 2002. She claims that the federal government wasn't moving fast enough, they were very concerned, and so they had to kind of take matters into their own hands in the meanwhile. And there are, like I said, other efforts that are in effect currently to ban reproductive cloning. Congressman Andy Harris has reintroduced a true ban on human cloning to the US Congress, and it's called the Human Cloning Prohibition Act of 2012. Ultimately, if reproductive cloning is permitted to happen and becomes accepted, it is difficult to see how any other dangerous applications of genetic engineering technology could be prescribed. So hopefully my partner and I were able to convince you that cloning should be banned federally. Reproductive